cabinet ringing. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a record business family.
So from early days, I knew that it was something that I was in love with. So for me, the romance was not the music itself, it was the business behind it.
I started young and always with the mindset that I would work for myself. So all through college, I would build these little marketing companies and perform services for different record labels, usually marketing-based services around specific projects. And I was fortunate enough to work on projects from artists like Pink Floyd, Radiohead, and be able to come up with sort of wacky, cool ideas.
We worked in the department that launched the first ever band website. It was a destination called Megadeth, Arizona, for the band Megadeth. And you could go on and you could send a postcard to somebody in the real world, but it was from Megadeth, Arizona. And there was no, it was very confusing, to people, because it was for early days of the internet. They're like, well, where is that? It doesn't exist, it's on the internet.
Our generation is fortunate enough to be at this intersection of the digital and in my case, it was the music business. But as the internet was becoming relevant and important in the early days, because we grew up playing with computers and understanding the internet from its inception, for us it's sort of second nature, where for the generation that was in the business at that time, it was slower to adopt. So that opportunity allowed a lot of leeway.
So I worked at various labels. I had the idea that the more places I worked, the more I would learn, so that when I went out on my own, I'd have these experiences. I always wanted to sit across the table from somebody and be able to say that I understand where you're coming from. So I wanted to do all of the possible jobs, even if for a short time, so I could have some understanding of what people were saying. And so I worked at Def Jam, and I worked at Capitol, and I worked at Island, Warner's, and a bunch of places.
After a while, I spent some time as an artist manager out on my own, and was able to do a lot of traveling. I spent some time tour managing,
and I was able to see a lot of things in the country and go all around the world and all these things. I was 19 and 20 years old when I was able to do that. I went to college at UC Santa Barbara, and I got my degree in Tibetan Buddhism, which was interesting, but it also allowed me the time, because a lot of it was independent study.
So I had the time to go out and do the things that I wanted to do and start the companies that I wanted to start, while having a cool narrative at school.
I didn't want to be sort of tunnel visioned into I'm going to get a business degree and come out, I'm going to get an MBA and know how to run a business and all of this. I wanted to run a business learning by making mistakes, and I made a lot. I mean, my biggest influence has always been my father, and he sort of was a guiding light about right and wrong, and business and family, and how to sort of balance these things.
I was fortunate enough to know a guy who was the president of Capitol Records called Hale Milgram, who taught me that there's nothing more important in the record business than the artists. Not you, not the executives, not anything, but the artists themselves. And that's a conflict that I've had to struggle with throughout my whole career in the record business, is how do you do the right thing by the artist, have them feel like that's the right thing, and then have it actually be the right thing.
There's an amazing person that I know called Bill Hellman, who is the managing partner of the Greylock Fund, which is a venture capital fund in Boston, who's given me very generous support in my companies. One of my big creative outlets now is cooking and eating.
I found that my friends have sort of shifted from being musicians into being chefs.
And I love being around them. I think creative energy. So for me, it's always been about finding that creative energy, and that could be any kind of artist. It could be a painter, it could be a musician, it could be an actor, it could be a chef. That creative energy for me is the driving force to do what I do, which is always to support that
and find ways to help them become more of who they are. And take what they're doing and help them put it into the world. That's always been my purpose. It's never been about me. I would be happy if no one ever knew my name.
Taking something that exists, so a library of, say, 800 films and finding new ways to give them life, new distribution. There's new countries that are interested in bringing in films that they're less interested or less inclined in the past to bring in Western films in this kind of volume that they are now. I love the idea of taking anything creative, so it's a dish, or it's a film, or it's a song. I love the experience of watching somebody experience it for the first time and take something from it. And I guess that's really what, for me, it's always boiled down to, whether we're building a website or making a record or now finding a new way to get a film distributed. I want people to have that experience. And for me, my joy comes from watching people get joy out of that piece of art. There are certainly artists that make a lot of money, and there are certainly a lot of artists that don't. And there's a whole business of people that support these artists. That means financially, that means marketing-wise, that means expertise, any of these things. And those people have families and lives as well. So when music is free, it's not impossible, but it's certainly harder for those people to have their work.
Well, it's great to sit at home and download music and go, this is free, because the perception is that it's free anyway. When it became a digital file that had no physical presence, it was free. Because there's no inherent value in it. In some ways, it's become more about how do you find a t-shirt and a keychain and a whatever that people want that force them, or cause them, I should say, to buy this record, more than it's become about the record. And artists have more marketing ideas than ever before, and maybe that's diminished the quality of the record itself. In January last year, well, it'll be January this year, we shut down the label. And although we had had success, the example that I use is that we had this great band, they're still a great band, called The Sounds from Sweden. And there was a week where The Sounds played at Roseland here. They did 2 shows at the Wiltern in LA. So maybe that's 5,000 or 6,000 people. That's all the band. And that week we sold like 400 records in the country. And that's not the band's fault. The record was good. Maybe it's our fault because we didn't market it right, but regardless, that problem becomes nearly insurmountable because people know the words, so they're getting the music. I'm strongly of the belief that content now is more valuable than ever because there's more distribution all the time. This idea, this internet thing, this whatever. But premium content, the content that people want, that's what's important. I think what's happened is that it's become so easy to create content, right? You talk about music, GarageBand, the bar's kind of been lowered, and it's much less expensive, and all of these things. That's definitely true. And in a lot of ways, it's a good thing. I think that the same is true for the film industry. The same is true for sort of any kind of content that people create, web-based content, interview-based content. So I think if you can create something that's compelling to people, that they are willing to seek out and find something that they can identify with, there's just so much content now sifting through it. The concept of edited selection has been an interesting one as things become more readily available. And I think ultimately people need an edited selection. But for that kind of content, I think the curator is what's important. When you think about NPR or some of the shows on NPR, think of This American Life. I would listen to anything that This American Life produces, and I don't care what it is. But there, it's about the curation. I was in LA just a week ago, and ate at some cool places. There's a couple of guys that have a restaurant called Animal, which is a meat-based restaurant. And then they have a fish, sort of, I guess, a second restaurant. It's a fish thing called Son of a Gun, which I loved. There's a Japanese steak dinner that you can have in LA, where the chef was an important chef in Japan, kind of got sick of what that entails and took a storefront in LA where he does this truly unbelievable multi-course meat dinner, where the first couple courses he prepares to show you that he has horsepower as a chef, but the rest comes out as just raw beef on a plate. So they do inside ribeye, outside ribeye, tongue, fillet, all kinds of cuts, small. Do them on the hibachi on your table, and it's the most perfect, unbelievable meat. and it goes back to the idea that, you know, there are some ingredients that are perfect the way that they are. It's the discovery of something new and meaningful for me, meaning my own kind of experience. And I live for other people having the same experience and being the cause of it.